Somewhere in the middle of the Panama Canal, there is an island where, for almost 100 years, nothing in the trees ever looked up. No monkey checked the sky, no sloth flinched at a passing shadow. Whole generations of animals lived out their entire lives moving through the canopy exactly the way their instincts told them to, without a single one of them ever needing to glance upward. On this island, the biggest threat you could face was disease, or a boa constrictor waiting quietly on a low branch. Death, when it came from below or from within your own body, never from above. Then, in the summer of 1999, 2 crates arrived by boat. Inside them were 2 birds, not condors, not vultures. Harpy eagles, the largest and most powerful birds of prey in the Western Hemisphere. Animals capable of snapping a monkey's spine with a single strike and carrying off prey that weighs more than half their own body weight. And scientists were about to release them on purpose onto an island crawling with monkeys that had absolutely no idea what a predator from the sky even was. What happened next became one of the most cited predator studies in modern conservation biology. It rewired how an entire population of wild primates behaved. It answered a question nobody was fully sure had an answer. More than 2 decades later, researchers are still pointing back to what happened on this one small island as a warning and a lesson about what we do and don't understand when we put predators back into the wild. This is the real story of Barro Colorado Island, and it is stranger and far more scientifically important than any title could really capture. Before we get into it, if you're into stories where real science ends up stranger than fiction, this channel is basically built for you. Hit subscribe right now, because trust me, where this story goes next, you do not want to miss it. Let's start with the island itself, because the island is not a coincidence. It is the entire reason this experiment could happen at all. Barro Colorado Island did not always exist. In the early 1900s, engineers building the Panama Canal dammed the Chagres River to create Gatun Lake, one of the largest artificial lakes in the world at the time. As the water rose, it swallowed valleys and hillsides, and the highest ground left standing became an island. 15 square kilometers of tropical rainforest, permanently cut off from the mainland by water on every side. In 1923, scientists realized exactly what they had: a patch of pristine rainforest, isolated, easy to monitor, difficult for large predators to reach. The Smithsonian Institution took over the island and turned it into one of the most closely studied pieces of rainforest anywhere on Earth. For decades, biologists lived there, tracked animals there, and recorded almost everything that moved. And in those decades, something quietly happened to the animals on that island. The big cats mostly vanished. Jaguars and pumas did not cross the water easily, and the few that did eventually disappeared. Harpy eagles, historically one of the primary predators of monkeys and sloths across Central and South America, had been absent from the region for somewhere between 50 and 100 years, which meant the monkeys of Barro Colorado Island, howler monkeys, capuchins, spider monkeys, tamarins, grew up in something close to paradise. No claws waiting in the canopy, no shadow crossing overhead. Disease was really the only thing keeping their numbers in check. Generation after generation lived and died without a single individual ever learning what it felt like to be hunted from the sky. That is the setup. Now here is the experiment. The Peregrine Fund, a raptor conservation organization based in Idaho, had spent years since the late 1980s learning how to breed harpy eagles in captivity, using birds donated by zoos across Latin America. Harpy eagles are in real trouble across their range. The species is listed as vulnerable by the IUCN, and it has already vanished from huge parts of Central America, including El Salvador and nearly all of Costa Rica. Panama, where the harpy eagle is the actual national bird printed on the country's coat of arms, is one of the last strongholds where wild populations still survive, mostly in the untouched rainforest of Darien Province. So the Peregrine Fund had a question they needed answered before scaling up any real release program. If you raise a harpy eagle in captivity with no parent ever teaching it to hunt, does it still know how? Can an animal raised in an enclosure actually survive and kill in the wild? Barro Colorado Island was the perfect place to find out. A closed system, constant monitoring, decades of baseline data on exactly how many monkeys, sloths, and other prey species live there. In June of 1999, a captive-bred male harpy eagle, not even 2 years old, was released onto the island fitted with a radio transmitter. In October of that same year, a captive-bred female followed. Scientists could now track their every move day by day. What they discovered stunned even the researchers who designed the experiment. Quick pause, because if this kind of deep dive into real wildlife science is your thing, make sure you are subscribed. I am about to walk you through the actual numbers from this study, and they are wild. Drop a comment telling me which one you think adapted faster, the eagles or the monkeys. I will be reading through them. These birds had never once watched an adult harpy eagle hunt. No parent showed them how to read the wind, how to time an ambush, how to judge distance before a strike. And yet, almost immediately, they started killing. Researchers tracked the male for 89 days and the female for 205 days between June 1999 and August 2000. In that window, the male captured 25 individual animals across 9 different mammal species. The female captured 46 animals across 8 mammal species, plus 1 reptile. More than half of both eagles' kills, 52% for the male and 54% for the female, were sloths, both the 2-toed and 3-toed species that had lived on this island essentially unbothered for generations. The eagles were not clumsy about it either. Over a nearly 10-month stretch where almost every kill was documented, the female made a successful capture roughly every 4.5 days, and the male every 3.5 days. Their hunting success rate, meaning the percentage of attempts that actually ended in a kill, sat somewhere between 38 and 49%. For context, that is, a strike rate most seasoned wild predators would be proud of, and these were animals with zero formal training. They even adjusted their tactics depending on the prey. Solitary, slow-moving animals up in the trees, they would stalk from as far as 50 meters away, closing the distance patiently. Prey that traveled in groups, they hit by surprise from much closer range, under 30 meters, timing the strike for a moment when the group's guard dropped. Ground-level prey got ambushed from even closer, under 10 meters. Nobody taught them this. They worked it out on their own. This alone would have made headlines in conservation science, proof that captive-bred birds of prey do not lose their instincts. And it is worth remembering just how recently science even confirmed that harpy eagles could do this at all. It was not until 1990 that a researcher formally documented a harpy eagle successfully killing an adult howler monkey, describing a violent, seconds-long struggle high in the canopy that ended with the eagle carrying the monkey off in its talons. Before that, biologists suspected harpies preyed on primates, but nobody had it confirmed and written down in the scientific record, which means everything happening on Barro Colorado Island less than a decade later was still, in real scientific terms, brand new territory. But the real story, the part almost nobody talks about, is what happened to the monkeys, because a second team of researchers had a completely different question. Not, can the eagles hunt, but can the monkeys learn fear? Remember, these howler monkeys had effectively no living memory of an aerial predator. Their population had been isolated from harpy eagles for 50 to 100 years. So scientists recorded actual harpy eagle attack calls, the specific vocalization the birds make while pursuing prey, and played those recordings back to the howler troops on the island. The result should not have been possible if instinctive fear needs generations to build. In under a year of the eagle's arrival, the howler monkeys on Barro Colorado Island had developed a specific, targeted alarm response to harpy eagle calls. Increased vigilance, less time spent feeding, more time scanning the canopy. Distinct alarm vocalizations reserved specifically for that sound, and critically, they did not react the same way to other bird calls. This was not generalized panic. It was a precise, learned response to one very specific threat. To make sure this was not a fluke, researchers played the same recordings to a separate population of howler monkeys living on the nearby Gigante Peninsula, a group that had no exposure to the reintroduced harpies at all. That group showed nothing close to the same reaction, same species, same region. The only real difference was direct experience with a living predator. Behaviorally, the response split by role inside the group. Adult female howlers would grab their infants and bolt for the densest cover they could find. Adult males would spread out and sound alarm calls, trying to cover as much ground as possible to warn the rest of the troop. Capuchin monkeys would bounce aggressively on branches. Tamarins would freeze in place completely. Even the sloths, normally the definition of passive, would hiss and swipe their claws when a harpy got close, even though it rarely saved them. And here's the detail that made scientists sit up. At some point, both harpy eagles were removed from the island for reasons unrelated to the research itself. You would expect the fear response to fade once the actual threat was gone. It did not. Researchers found that the howler monkey's alarm response to harpy calls persisted for at least 7 months after the eagles were physically removed from Barro Colorado Island. The birds were gone. The fear stayed. Think about what that actually means. In under a year, an entire wild population had installed something like a permanent update to their threat detection system, and that update did not simply uninstall itself the moment the danger disappeared. It is one of the clearest real-world examples ever documented of a wild primate population rapidly acquiring and then holding on to a completely new anti-predator behavior in response to a single reintroduction event. This finding lines up with something researchers later confirmed elsewhere in the region, too. In a separate study comparing howler monkeys in Mexico, one population living alongside both jaguars and harpy eagles, and another population where both predators had been locally extinct for decades, scientists played the same kind of predator call recordings to both groups. The naive monkeys, the ones with no living predator on their landscape, showed a dramatically weaker response than the experienced ones. In other words, fear of a specific predator is not something a species is simply born knowing forever. It fades without exposure, and it can be rebuilt astonishingly fast once a real threat returns. Barro Colorado Island is the clearest recorded case of that rebuilding happening in real time, in a wild population on a measurable timeline. Now let's talk about the bird itself for a second, because the raw numbers explain exactly why this animal is so dangerous to something the size of a monkey. A female harpy eagle can weigh up to 20 pounds with a wingspan stretching past 7 feet. Their talons average close to 5 inches long in females, genuinely comparable in size to a grizzly bear's claws, and they are strong enough to kill and carry off prey weighing roughly half the eagle's own body weight. This is not a bird snatching rabbits. This is an animal built specifically to pull a full-grown monkey out of a tree. There is even a strange, almost forensic detail buried in later research on this exact case. Scientists studying the leftover remains from harpy eagle kills on Barro Colorado Island found that the bird leaves behind a distinct, identifiable damage pattern on bones depending on what it killed. Sloth remains showed one specific pattern. Medium-sized monkeys showed another. Larger, heavier monkeys showed a third. In other words, researchers can now look at a scattered pile of bones on the forest floor and work out roughly what kind of animal died there and how, purely from the way a harpy eagle's talons and beak process the body. It is the kind of detail that sounds like something out of a crime show, except the crime scene is a rainforest canopy and the culprit is a bird. And this was not an isolated stunt either. The Barro Colorado release was only one piece of a much larger program. In total, the Peregrine Fund released 49 captive-bred harpy eagles across Panama and Belize as part of this restoration effort, with a dedicated breeding facility, the Neotropical Raptor Center, opening in Panama City in 2001. Since the year 2000, the same organization has monitored 56 harpy eagle nest sites across Panama's Darien province in one of the longest continuous studies ever conducted on this species. The stakes behind all of it are steep. A harpy eagle pair typically raises just one chick every 2 to 3 years. The female lays 2 eggs, but once the first one hatches, the second is essentially abandoned. Chicks do not reach breeding maturity until they are 4 to 6 years old. That means every single bird lost to hunting or deforestation sets a population back by years, sometimes decades. It is why the IUCN lists the species as vulnerable, uplisted from near threatened as recently as 2021, and why it has already been wiped out entirely from places like El Salvador. So when you zoom out, the 2 harpy eagles released on Barro Colorado Island were not just a wild science experiment for its own sake. They were a real-world test of whether an entire conservation strategy could actually work. Whether you can breed a top predator in captivity, drop it into a forest it has never seen, and expect it to survive, hunt, and function the way its wild ancestors did for millions of years. And on that island, full of unsuspecting monkeys, the answer turned out to be yes. Not only did the eagles hunt successfully almost immediately with no training at all, the prey species responded exactly the way evolutionary theory predicted they should, developing a specific, lasting fear of a threat most of them had never personally witnessed. Nobody involved was entirely sure either half of that equation would hold up. The eagles might have been too domesticated to hunt properly. The monkeys might have had no biological mechanism left to recognize an old enemy after a century of peace. Instead, both sides of this experiment prove something remarkable about how deeply predator and prey remain wired into each other, even after the connection between them has been severed for generations. That is the real story behind this video, not a monster movie. A real, documented, scientifically rigorous case study that conservationists and animal behaviorists still cite today whenever the conversation turns to reintroducing predators into the wild and whether nature remembers what it was built to fear. And here's the part that puts a final, strange bow on the whole thing. Even now, decades on, with a national restoration program behind it and Panama's forests still holding a wild breeding population, actually seeing a harpy eagle in the wild remains one of the rarest experiences in the Americas. Researchers who spend their careers studying this bird will tell you that finding one usually means tracking a known active nest for days, not stumbling across one by chance. The same animal that rewired an entire island's worth of monkey behavior in under a year is, to this day, one of the hardest predators on the planet to actually lay eyes on. Powerful enough to change how a species behaves forever. Elusive enough that most people who live their entire lives inside its range never see one at all. If you found this as fascinating as I did, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe if you have not already, because I dig up stories exactly like this one every single week. Real events, real research, told the way they actually happened, without the exaggeration most channels add on top. And if you want to know about other predator reintroductions that went wildly right or spectacularly wrong, drop it in the comments below, and I will cover it in a future video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.